Now what we'd like to do for today's session is really take a closer look into the title preferences that you have available in Lectora. Now I know from a training perspective, when we offer training, instructor-led training, we don't always have the time in class to go over each and every feature that's going to be available to you. And I think it's really important to understand some of the options that you have when developing your content, because if you work with a group of people, you'll quickly realize not everyone uses Lectora the same way. So there's different features and different ways of creating your content, and it's really helpful to know all of the different preferences that you have available to you. So this session is certainly not meant to be a long session. We should get through the content fairly quickly this week, but I think the information, and hopefully once it's presented to you, might give you some other things to think about, might open some ideas for you in your content development. So let's go ahead and dive in, so we can start taking a look at the title preferences that are going to be available to you. Now certainly as we go throughout this presentation, I will jump into Lectora Live and show you some of this in real time in a sample course, but let's kind of give a nice overview of the information first. So what we're going to focus on is your title preferences, and your title preferences can be found within the File menu. So if you go to your File menu and you choose the Lectora preferences, you're going to see the window that looks just like this. So let's first focus on this General tab. Now, in terms of training, when we have our fundamental and our intermediate training classes, we can go over some of these items. We certainly don't cover every single one of them. So that's kind of the goal for today's session, is to really touch base on each one and show you what each one can do for you in terms of your development. So the first option we have here, it says show buttons for hiding objects in the Title Explorer. Now certainly if you're a brand new user and you're looking at this option for the very first time, it's not very intuitive as to what exactly that's going to do for you. So let's take a look at an example and show you what this feature, what this preference will do. If you select this Show Buttons for Hiding Objects in the Title Explorer, what it's going to do is in your Title Explorer of your left-hand pane, this is the area where it's showing you your entire course structure. It's also showing you all of the objects in your course, any text blocks, pages, images, video files, you name it, it's listed here. Well, if you take a look at all of your title, chapter, and section levels, you're going to see this little, looks like a little minus sign, which is going to allow you to easily collapse all of the items that are listed there at that specific level. So if you have a lot of elements at your title level that are being inherited throughout your entire content, that can cause for a pretty large Title Explorer. Once it's expanded, you've got a lot of content there, as you can see in this example here. If you want to organize that Title Explorer, you want to shift your focus a little bit, maybe focus on one page, and you really don't want to see all of that content that you might have at one of those inherited levels, all you have to do is select that little minus sign, and it's going to collapse everything and just create kind of a default placeholder here that says Hidden Objects. So that's a nice means for keeping your Title Explorer organized. We know that one of the best tips we can provide, especially new users in Lectora, is to keep that Explorer as organized as possible. It makes development that much easier if you have a clear understanding and a clearer, bigger picture as to what you're creating. The next option available within this General tab says Show Visibility Checkboxes in the Title Explorer. If you've enabled this feature, what you'll notice is in your Title Explorer, to the left of any of your objects, you'll see a little gray rectangle. This is your visibility checkbox. Now, if you click on this gray rectangle, it then becomes kind of an empty white rectangle, if you will. And what this allows you to do is turn visibility either on or off for any of the objects contained within your course. So where is this useful? This becomes really useful on a page, let's say, where you've got a lot of layering. So if you look at the example I'm using here, take a look at this screenshot on the right. You can see when I've built this page, I have several text blocks that are sitting on top of one another. So it's kind of giving you that jumbled look. They're sitting on top of each other here. A lot of times when I'm developing, I might wish to turn off some of the visibility of those objects as I'm building the page, so I can really just focus on one layer at a time. And this is what these visibility checkboxes are going to do for you. Anyone who's familiar with using an application like Photoshop, it's very similar to how you can turn the layer view on or off. So that's your visibility checkboxes. I definitely recommend keeping those turned on. A lot of times in training, I might say, okay, everyone, poke out that visibility checkbox for your graphic. And if someone says, I don't have that option, that's why that this is not turned on within those preferences. The third option here is a really useful preference. This is usually defaulted on. Use resource names for object names. So what this is going to do for you is as you pull content, as you pull media into your Lectora titles, however that media has been named, however that file name is, let's say you're pulling in a graphic from your desktop, and let's say that graphic name is called Measuring Cup, and it looks like this image here. If you have this option turned on, as soon as you add that image to your Lectora title, in the Title Explorer, it's going to pull in that same file name. So you'll be able to keep this object named, in this example, Measuring Cup, instead of it defaulting to something really generic like Image 1, Image 2, Image 3. Now again, going back to those tips and tricks and good ways of using Lectora, the more organized you can keep this Title Explorer, the easier your development becomes. If you're applying, let's say, a show action to one of the objects on this page, and you look in your Title Explorer and all of your images are default, they're image 1, image 2, image 3, it's very hard to remember, okay, well, was it image 2 that I wanted to show here, or was that image 6? So if you can keep your Title Explorer as organized as possible, keep these names as appropriate as you can, it makes that development so much easier. So it's really a no-brainer to keep this preference turned on. Because if you take the time when you're gathering your media and let's say your graphics, your video files, your audio files, if you've got those aptly named before you pull them into your project, then that just saves you an extra step and you don't have to rename it once it's in Lectora. Question here from the chat, can the base level objects be grouped? Absolutely. You can have a group of objects that is inherited down from that title level or the chapter level or the section level as well. The next option here, this is pretty easy, spell check text objects while typing. Very similar to a lot of other applications that I'm sure you've all used before. Lectora will enable you to check your spelling as you're typing. So if you take a look at my screenshot, any words that come up as misspelled, Lectora will underline those with a red line. You can right-click on those underlined words, and then it will show you a list of other options that you can select from. So very easy to modify and kind of modify that spelling as you're going and building your content. So again, that's another no-brainer. You'd want to leave that one turned on as you develop your content. Now the next option here probably isn't going to apply to the majority of you, but I'll explain briefly what this is going to do for you. Use default IMS metadata when creating your objects. Now essentially metadata, kind of an easy definition of metadata, is just data about data. Typically this is going to include information such as the description of an object, the author of an object, the date it was created, and so on. So let's say you have a graphic within your course and you want to provide some information about that graphic. Typically metadata is really used for search engines so that students or other clients can search for specific elements within your project through a search engine. So based on that information you've supplied in the metadata. Now the nice thing here, if you select this option, it's automatically going to apply some default metadata to all of the objects within your title. If you're not using this option here, and again, the majority of you really won't use metadata, but the option here is if you weren't going to use this global preference, then here you can see a screenshot that I've got on the right-hand side. Metadata can be found within the properties of every object you pull into Lectora, and then you can set it there specifically. So kind of a nice overall option if you're someone that is using metadata, you're creating that information or that data that's going to be utilized in the search engines, then if you select this option here, it's going to apply that to all of your objects globally. The next option here, again, this is a complete preference. This is a user preference. Show the Getting Started dialog on program start. I like to leave this certainly turned on. I find it useful that when I launch Lectora, I'm presented with this Getting Started dialog. This is going to provide me with easy access to a bunch of learning resources. This is actually where you can also access all of these archived webinars that you're attending right now. But it also gives me the ability to start new projects, open previous titles, and then launch any of those Inspire tools such as Camtasia, Flypaper, Snagit, etc. So complete user preference, but that's what that one refers to. Show the text formatting marks. Again, this is kind of another no-brainer here. If you set this preference on, it's going to allow you to easily identify your spacing and your paragraphs within all of your text. So you can see some of those paragraph and spacing marks within my text example here. Now if we look at the bottom here, it shows the location for your media library folder. Now by default, what's contained in your media library are all of Lectora's clip art, all of the flash activities, all of the character poses, and then of course, we remember there's that whole My Library section that you can utilize. By default, this media library, you can see from the location here that I've got plugged in, this is the default location, and it's stored within your Lectora program files. Now, if you've included a lot of your own custom elements in the My Library section, let's say I've imported my own graphics, my own video files, audio files, company logos, etc., and it might be really beneficial for other members of my team to access that same information. I can modify the location of where these media elements are stored, and if I put them, let's say, on a shared server, if I change the location here to a shared server, then anyone who has access to that shared server, like my other colleagues, will easily be able to access that information. So it's really creating a nice centralized location for all of your media files. So if you take a look at the example that I've got here, let's assume that I've got a Dropbox space that my team and my colleagues all have access to. I can modify that media library folder location here, and notice I've just pointed it to a specific folder within Dropbox, and this folder, again, my colleagues have access to. So now anything that I've added to my library within Lectora, let's say I've got a couple custom graphics in here, some logos, some video files, you name it, now that's going to be accessible within that Dropbox folder. So this is a really great space. It's a really great forum for you to just create a nice centralized location. The last thing available here in your General tab is asking you for a username. This is really beneficial to provide your information here, because Lectora has a lot of features that can be used when you're collaborating on your projects. You have the ability to add notes throughout your course. Notes can be used for personal feedback, maybe reminding yourself to go back and add something to a page or complete some functionality, but it can also be used to communicate with other team members that might be working on the same project. So if you look in my screenshot, because I plugged in my username in my preferences, anytime I add a note now, it has my username right at the top of that note. So if I'm sharing this title back and forth with other colleagues, I'm generating notes reports like you see here, you're going to see all of the different notes and who they were created by. So it really creates a nicer form of communication when you're working and collaborating on these different projects. So certainly here in your preferences, it's a very easy option. You just need to provide your name, but it does go a long way in the terms of using some of those collaboration features like notes and running notes reports. Let's move on to our Editors tab. Now this might not be something that new users are really aware of, so I want to make sure you understand how this is working. If you take a look here, you have a number of different editors that you can associate with your Lectora application. So first and foremost, you've got your images, your audio editors, your video editors, etc., etc. Now if you look at my screenshot, by default, when I'm working with Lectora Inspire, you have the access to Snagit, Camtasia, and certainly Flypaper. So if you take a look here, let's give you an example. For my images, you'll notice that I have Snagit plugged in. So Snagit is a screen capture tool and also an image editing tool. So because I have Snagit listed here within my image editor, what that means is every time I right-click on an image in my title and I select Edit, it's automatically going to launch that image in Snagit. Now let's say I was a big Photoshop user and I had Photoshop installed on my machine. I could select the folder option here. I can select the Photoshop application, so it would be plugged in here to my image editor, and then at that point, anytime I chose to edit a graphic from my title, it would automatically launch in Photoshop instead. So this is a great space that you can take advantage of other external applications that you're already familiar with, that you already like to use for your image editing, for your audio editing. Let's say you've got Audacity installed on your machine. You could plug that in, and that can be your audio editor. Now, certainly, if you're working with Lectora Inspire and you have access to Lectora's audio editor, Lectora's video editor, you can also plug those in here as well. So you see in the example I've given, in my audio editor field, I have just Lectora's audio editor. And you can see here, when I right-click on an audio file that's included in my title, and when I select Edit, it automatically launches that audio editor for me. So a number of good things there. It's a great way to take advantage of some other applications that you might currently be using, some external applications, so you don't always have to just stay confined within Lectora's tools and resources. You can certainly use some of the other applications that you might already be familiar with. So let me bounce into our sample title for a second just to cover some of those first two tabs there, some of the elements from our general tab, and of course just kind of touch base on where you can find this editor's information. So if you take a look, I've got just our sample title, and this is the Let's Cook title that is available from our website. You can download this as a sample course, so I'm not using anything different than just that sample content. So if we take a look, if you go up to your File ribbon and you select the Lectora preferences, that's kind of what our focus is on today for our session. And I've been going through this General tab here. And here's the Editors tab that I was just focusing on as well. So let's show you a couple of these things. The first thing we talked about was that show buttons for hiding objects in the Title Explorer. So if you take a look at the top of my Title Explorer, you see here's my title level, and I've got a number of objects that sit at the title level. These are all being inherited throughout the rest of my title. And you can see once these are expanded, it causes that Title Explorer to be pretty large, a lot of things going on here. So if I needed to collapse this or really just kind of focus my view and focus my attention, I can select this little, looks like a minus sign, and it automatically hides all of the elements that are at that specific level. Notice you can do the same for other areas within your title. If you have elements at chapter levels, if you have elements inherited down at a section level, it's the same idea. So it's just that little collapse icon that becomes available to you. Now working on a page, if I expand this page view, and I've got a lot of groups on this page, but you can see next to any of the objects contained within my title, to the left-hand side I have this little gray checkbox. This is your visibility checkbox. If I click on this gray box, it turns white, and notice that measuring cup graphic hides from my view. It's not deleted from my page, it's still in my course, it's just at this particular moment I'm not focusing on it. If I put this in runner preview mode, I'm still going to see that graphic because it's still there. But a lot of times when you're developing your content and you're using that edit mode, you're going to have layering scenarios that it might make sense to really focus on one object or another. So that's your visibility checkbox option. I talked a little bit about resource names. You can see here these, if I pulled in, let's say I've got these graphics ready to be added to my title. Notice this one here is called Measuring Cup. When I dragged and dropped it here onto my title page, it automatically renamed as Measuring Cup in my Title Explorer. So it didn't default to something like Image 1 or Image 2 because I was using that resource names preference. The other thing I talked a little bit about was adding notes, and someone in the chat was asking where they can go to add a note. So I just want to show you this option as well. If you go up to your Tools ribbon, you have a section here where you can add a note. And if I click on this note, notice that it automatically has my username up at the top. I can say, just create a default note there. It has the timestamp down at the bottom. And if I right-click on the note, I can even change the note's color. This is a great feature, too, where you can come up with your own kind of color-coded system. Maybe green notes refer to media issues, pink notes refer to navigation issues, etc., etc. And the nice thing about this is when you create your note, again, you have your icon. You can move it anywhere you want within the page. And then, of course, you can always just, from this Tools ribbon, run your notes report as well. And this just gives you the ability to see all of the notes currently within this title, and you can see who has created those notes, when they were created, etc. So that's why it's important to make sure that your username is provided within your preferences, so that way you know who's creating and who's communicating within your project. Now remember, within the Lectora preferences from the Editors tab, you can see here that when it comes to editing my images, I'm going to use Snagit by default. So anytime I choose to edit a graphic in my title, it's going to launch in Snagit. So let me show you how that would work. I'll come back here to my measuring cup graphic, and let's say I wanted to maybe add an embellishment to this image, or I wanted to edit it somehow. If I right-click on the graphic and I select Edit, because in my Editors field it has Snagit, the Snagit application, notice here it automatically launches that image in Snagit. Now certainly I'm not going to do an entire Snagit review here, but if I make a simple change, and I'll just do something like that so you can really see, if I modify my graphic here and I save it out and just go back to my title, notice my graphic now in my title has automatically been updated. So in terms of utilizing those editors, it makes your editing very seamless, very quick. You don't have to always leave Lectora completely, open up that file in your external application. You can really sync it into your overall process, which I think is really, really useful. All right, so back to our presentation here. Let's continue and go to that Course Mill tab. We'll come back to our Lectora title a little bit later. Course Mill, this is pretty self-explanatory in terms of what you're being offered here in your preferences. If you are a Course Mill user, so Course Mill is just the name of Trivanis' own learning management system. If you are currently using that learning management system, we make it very easy for you to provide your credentials here. And once the information is provided here, so your host, your instructor's password, etc., when you go through the publishing process, it's very easy for you to just simply upload your title right directly to Course Mill. So simply put, if you're not using the Course Mill Learning Management System, this is something that you can ignore. You don't have to worry about this preference. If you are using Course Mill, however, you'll want to make sure that this information has been provided, it is correct, and then that way when you're ready to publish, you can publish and push directly over to the LMS. So that's pretty self-explanatory. The next offering is very similar to Course Mill. This is our Lectora Express LMS. This is our new application. This is a new tool that Trivanis has created. It is still in beta right at the moment. Same idea here. If you provide your credentials, if you are a Lectora Express client, you provide your credentials here. And when you're ready to publish, there's a publish option now to publish to Lectora Express. This will again allow you to push that content directly over to that system. If you're someone who's looking for more information, this is more or less an express learning management system. We have a lot more information about this on our website, so you can go out to lectora.com. So I don't want to spend too much time on that, again, because it's pretty self-explanatory. If you plug in your appropriate credentials here, you'll be able to publish out your content. Now let's not forget about Review Link. Review Link is a free tool for anyone with your Lectora license. Review Link is a review tool that allows you to publish your content. We host it free on our servers. We host up to 5 simultaneous titles. And what this allows you to do is, again, if you plug in your credentials here, so your email, your password, etc., when you're ready to publish your content to Review Link, it automatically will push out for you. So again, Review Link is a fantastic tool. If you're not taking advantage of it, please do. You have free access to it with your Lectora license. This allows you to publish out your titles to a hosted space where you can then provide access to different reviewers, your subject matter experts, your clients, etc., and they can provide real-time feedback. So they can go through the published content, they can test it, they can leave feedback, and you get all that information and make any necessary changes. So again, if you want more information on ReviewLink, we've done tons of webinars in the past on ReviewLink specifically and how it works and its functionality, so lots of information available on our website. Now the auto update option, this again is extremely self-explanatory. Keep this option turned on. This is going to look to make sure that your Lectora application is up to date. Frequently we will release updates, new features, some fixes, so you want to make sure that you're utilizing this information and you're checking for updates to make sure that you're working with the latest and greatest. Now I want to spend a little bit of time talking about publish strings. This is a feature I think that gets unlooked by a lot of our users, and I want to really focus on some of the advantages to modifying and working with your publish strings. So let's take a look at these. Essentially, your publish strings, this is where you can actually customize all of the default text that might be used within your title. So when we think about offering test results to your learner, content-generated emails, some of your program buttons, etc., you can actually change all of the text here. So it's not just the default text that you're seeing. An example that I want to show you is, let's say that at the end of a test, you want to display test results to the student. Well, by default, if they don't pass the test, automatically it says the word failed, big capital letters. It's not the most sensitive message, so you might want to modify that to something a little bit more sensitive where instead of seeing in big capital letters the word failed, you might want to say, I'm sorry, you did not pass the test. Well, it's here within your publish strings that you can do that and you can make those changes. So let me go into Lectora, and we'll show you a couple of good examples here. So let's take a look at a few things within our Let's Cook title and show you what's been created for us. First and foremost, I have a test. You can see my test chapter here. It's just called my knowledge check. And if I go into my test properties and I take a look at the results tab, I just want to show you that I have this option selected that says show test results. So because I have this turned on, at the end of my test, I'm going to present my learner with an additional window of test results. It's going to tell the learner if they passed or failed. I can customize this so it shows some different information. So far I have that set up here. So now let me show you the publish strings within your preferences where you can make some of those changes that I was talking about a few minutes ago. So from my file menu, if I go into my Lectora preferences, and let's take a look at the publish strings. Now right now I'm looking at my string set. These are the default publish strings. So if you read through the descriptions of each one of these texts, this is by default how it will appear within your title. So you can see a couple things at the top here. The test results text that precedes the user's answer. It will say your answer, and then it will actually fill in with the learner's response. You can change the values of any of these descriptions. Now if I scroll down a little bit, I want to show you this feature here. This is what I want to focus on in my example. So it says the test results text that equates to a non-passing score. So essentially at the end of a test, when these test results are presented to the learner, if the learner does not pass the test, they're going to see this big failed text. Capital letters, it's kind of right in your face, it's not the most sensitive. Now, assuming I want to change this, now I can certainly just take this text out and modify it to my own, but a better way of doing this, I think, is I like to leave the string set, I like to leave the default publish options as its own string. I don't really want to mess with that. I kind of want to create my own string so then I can make whatever changes that I want, but I can always go back to the default options if I needed to. So if you'll notice, up at the top here, on the top right-hand corner, you have some options to add and create some of your own published strings. So certainly, if I wanted to create my own new set, I could call this Tara's set. And if you take a look, now that I've got Tara's set here, I can modify any of this text that I want. Sorry, that is not correct. You did not pass. Anything I want there. So I can go through and kind of modify all different options. And there's tons of different messages that by default will be displayed within your title. This is also a great area if you are creating content in multiple languages. This is where you would actually want to come and create maybe a Spanish set, so that way you can modify the text and make sure it's in the appropriate language. Now the other option you see here is you can actually export these string sets and then import string sets in as well. This is a great way to collaborate with other team members. So let's say I went through and I customized an entire set with all of the wording and the verbiage that our company has decided on, that this is, the default text and messages that we want in all of our courses moving forward. Well, once I've got it created once, it's very easy for me to export it. It just creates a TXT file. And also, then I could share it with other colleagues, and all they have to do is just import it in. Choose what new name they want, and they just choose that text file. Now what I've done previously is, again, I've worked with my colleague Daryl, and he's created a new string, and I've already imported that in. So again, I just went here, and I'll just call this test. And all it is, it's just a text file. So you can see here, this is the last thing that I imported in, and it's just a text document. So you can see here, just a .txt. So that's all you need to do to import kind of new strings in. Now if we look through Daryl's, he's made a couple changes to the text, and the biggest change here is the one we just talked about. So where it says the test results text that equates to a non-passing score, instead of this saying failed in big capital letters, we've changed the text to I'm sorry, you did not pass. So if I plug in this new string set here and select OK, that's now going to apply to this particular title. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to run through this test pretty quickly, and I'm just going to answer all the questions incorrect so that when we get to the end and we pull up the test results, instead of it saying failed in big bold letters, you're going to see our new text that we've supplied with that new string set. So let me go here into preview mode, and again, I am just going to run through these questions very quickly. I'm not going to answer them all. I'm just going to answer them, make sure that I get them all incorrect. And as we're going through, you'll see this is just going to give you just maybe some question ideas too, even though we're not focusing on questions on this webinar, but we can always learn new things. And again, I'm just going through very quickly, making sure that I fail the test so we can see our example. And we're almost there. Okay, so we've reached the end of the test, and I have the option now to just pull up my test results. So I'm going to click this button, and here we go. This is default text that has been created, and in that string set that I just showed you, we have the ability to change a couple of these things. So see this line here, it now says, I'm sorry, you did not pass. If I had left the default published string in there, it would have said failed in big capital letters. So that's just one way of utilizing those published strings. I think it's a good example to show live on today's demonstration, but that's a great space to take advantage if you want to modify any of the default text that's included within your content. And again, if you're creating content in multiple languages, that's definitely something that you're going to want to modify as well, because then you can change it to all the appropriate languages. And I think there was a question about something like that in the chat window, but I'll go ahead and kind of get to that at the end as well. Let me go back to my presentation. The next option you have within your title preferences is you have the published strings, or the published messages now. This is going to apply to all of your publishing when you run that error check. So every time you go to publish in Lectora, you have that error check window. And basically what this is going to allow you to do is to determine what messages and what errors you have show up in that check. So we take a look at some of the options that are available in here. First, there's an option that says show only errors and warnings. If you check this box, it's going to have all of your informational messages, so all the ones that are displayed in black, is going to be completely omitted from that publish and error check window. So essentially, if you check this, it's only going to show you warnings and errors. It's not going to give you any other information, any other informational messages about your content. If you select the Show HTML warnings, this is going to enable the selection of all of those HTML-specific warnings, which we'll talk about now. So there's a warning here that says show warnings for resource sizes. This one always kind of throws people off a little bit in training, so I want to mention this a little bit. This is going to show you warnings for the size of objects within your title. Now essentially, this warning is only going to be displayed if the object or the resource is larger than 128 kilobytes. Now, we get the question all the time in training where, wow, why is it giving me this warning for this graphic or for this audio file? Is it too big for Lectora? Is it too big for my title? And absolutely not. The only reason that Lectora provides you with these warnings is a lot of times when you publish your content, depending on where you are taking those published files to your learning management system, etc., a lot of times you have a file size restriction for your content. In terms of Lectora development, you can create titles as large as you want. We've put full-length movies in our Lectora titles. So it's not an issue in terms of Lectora and publishing. You can have as many large files as you need. We just give you the warnings here so that in case when you're publishing out your content, if you need to kind of cut that size down a little bit to meet whatever file size restrictions you might have, let's say within your learning management system, we can generate some warnings for you. You can, remember, publish your content out with as many warnings as you have, so you do not have to fix warnings. It's just kind of like some more information about the resources within your title. Certainly your errors, the things that show up in red, you absolutely have to fix those before you continue publishing. But the warnings show up in blue, and it's just some additional information about your resources. You can also show warnings for any unused resources or variables. Essentially, this will populate within your error check window if, let's say, you have a resource that was once in your title, let's say like a video, and then you've deleted it out. It's just kind of saying, hey, you had this in your title at one point, now it's not there any longer. Is this something that you need? And it'll ask you a couple of options, and you can even from there say, no, I don't need it, let's delete it out, and then you won't get the warning for it any longer. So just kind of keeping you up to date on what's happening within your title progression. You can also turn on a warning to show flash overlap. Essentially, if you have an object overlapping one of your flash files within your Lectora title, it will cause an error. So it's just kind of letting you know, gives you a little warning, hey, you've got to make sure that you don't have anything overlapping. So those are some ways to modify what you're seeing in that error check process. And again, the error check process happens no matter what you're publishing to. So whether you're publishing to a single file executable, you're publishing HTML, or of course all of your learning management systems, you have some options that you can work with there. The last option that we have in our title preferences is your form elements. And you've got a couple ways of working with this. The form elements that you see here, you can certainly modify the look and feel of all of the radio buttons and all of the checkboxes within your titles. Now, what's the benefit here of plugging in these different styles in the actual Lectora title preferences? Well, if let's say there's a style that you're using 90% of the time in all of the courses you develop, then definitely set those up here, because once they're plugged in here, any new title that you create from now on, it's automatically going to be applied based on the styles that you've got set up in here. Now, let's assume that, sure, 90% of the titles that you create and develop, you want to use these styles that I show here. But let's say there's that one-off title that you want to do a different look and feel for those radio buttons and for those checkboxes. There's a way of doing that as well, and I'll show you this in Lectora in just a moment. So here, in your Lectora preferences is where I would suggest you set up the preference and style that you use the most. But then, if you're working within a specific title, you can always go to the Test and Survey ribbon where you can modify the look and feel of your radio buttons and your checkboxes there. So let me show you what I mean by that. And we'll go back into our title. So again, if I go to my File menu and I access my preferences, my form elements here is where I can modify checkboxes and radio buttons. We've got a couple different styles for you to choose from. And we also give you the option to import in your own custom graphics. If you've created your own graphic that you want to use for the radio buttons and the checkboxes, you absolutely can do so. And again, my advice is that here in your preferences to plug in the styles that you use most often, because once you set these in here, if I create a new title in tomorrow or next week, these styles are still going to be set up here within your preferences. So once I hit OK, these preferences will be saved. Now, if you wanted to modify the look and feel of those form objects for just one title, you can come over here to your Test and Survey ribbon, and you have these options here to customize both your radio buttons and your checkboxes. So if you select this option, again, you can modify the look and feel. You can even browse for your own specific files to use, and that will be applied to this particular title. Now, the nice thing about your radio buttons and your checkboxes is when you set the style for a title, it's going to apply to all of the buttons and boxes in your course. And that's just a good design tip, good consistency tip. You don't want pink checkboxes and then green checkboxes and then blue checkboxes. So we try to make sure that your design is somewhat consistent. So that will help you out as well. So in terms of the Lectora preferences, definitely there are a lot of options to choose from. I find that most of our new users, when they begin developing their content, a lot of times they just, they kind of go with the default options that are already turned on for them, and they really rarely take the time to discover what options might be available to them. So I wanted to have this webinar today just to go over all of the options that are available to you in case you haven't really uncovered them, if you've just been working with the default ones. Hopefully we've shed a little bit of light on some of the other options that might be available to you when you're developing out your content.